G'day, hope you're all well. Today we're going to be checking out some new features in Appdaemon. To do that, we're going to be using an example of a reticulation controller. I've been in my house for about a year and I need to get my retic working on an automated controller. So we're going to use Appdaemon to do that, and hopefully you're going to be able to get something out of it that you can use in other applications. You'll learn some features of Appdaemon. Now, I'm using a little project I worked on a year ago. It uses an ESP32, has some inputs and some output relays. I didn't specifically make it for a reticulation controller, and I've used it in different applications and found it to be quite handy. But this is what we're going to be using today to control reticulation, and the programming is going to be done in Appdaemon. So let's jump in and see what we can learn. Perhaps you can take what you get today and apply it to your own application. Okay, so this is the system in action. We've got it set up in the front end on the wall tablet just here. And this is just about to start in a minute. So we should see the first station come on. If you press one of these and turn it off before it starts, it won't run that station in the program. So now that's started, so the first station's come on, the main valves come on. Once that's gone through 15 minutes, it'll do the next one. So let's jump in and see how the code is done.
Okay, so to start off with, I'd just like to point out that if you want to follow along on the written version, there is one on my website, so you can check out different parts there if it's easy for you to have a look at. It also has a little section about just setting up the helpers that you'll need in Home Assistant, which is pretty easy. You can do it in the GUI, and you'll need those if you want to set up stations in your Home Assistant front end. So that's just written there on the website just here, which will be in the link in the comments down below, and also in the comments below there should be the links to the files if you want to check the files out for this particular application we're making for Appdaemon. But other than that, we're going to jump into VS Code now, and we'll check out what we're going to cover today. So basically the point of these videos is to demonstrate the functions of Appdaemon so that you can use them without having to spend heaps of time trying to figure it out. You may not want a reticulation system, but I hope you can take the principles and it will save you some trial and error in whatever you do want to make with it. Appdaemon is a Python script and you can use any Python module, but the built-in functions that they've provided in Appdaemon are specific to make it easier for you to automate stuff in Home Assistant. And the more I've been using it, the more I've sort of found it's pretty good, that all the little functions and features that it has when it comes to making automation apps. So it's good to use the ones that are built in first before you go and use something from a standard Python mod. So we're going to have a look at 5 areas, and that's arguments, importing arguments from our app setup into our app so we can reuse our apps and it's easy to change them without changing the code. And also we're going to look at passing arguments from listeners and timers back into callback functions, and how to pass keyword arguments like custom ones. And then we're going to have a look at using handles just to cancel timers and callbacks. Quickly look at formatting our log entries. We're going to have a look at constraints, and also we're going to check out sequences. And they're all part of Appdaemon, those things. So to start off, we'll have a look at arguments. And if you have a look at this screen just here, basically this is the method of bringing in arguments from our app setup. So if we look at our app setup, we've got our reticulation module. In the first video we covered the first 3 that you see here, but in these ones here, these are custom. You can make them whatever you like. So I've got our main valve that's been brought in, and that's an entity from Home Assistant. We've got our start time, which is another entity from Home Assistant. We've got watering days, so what days it will run on. And we've got stations. Now the stations are lists of dictionaries. So as you can see, you can bring in lists of dictionaries or lists of lists or just strings or integers. You can bring all sorts of things into your app to use. So once you've got the things you want to bring in, you come over here and you can see we bring in, for example, stations, which is a list of dictionaries. And we use this statement just here, self-args, and then the stations, which relates to this just here. So we can bring that in and we store it in this variable. You've now got a list of dictionaries in that variable to use within your application. And the same with start time. it brings in the entity as a string. The same with main, it brings in the entity as a string. And this one here, watering days, what we're actually doing is we're bringing in a list of days just here, and then we're using this here to convert it into a string, so it's no longer actually a list, because that is how the function within our app is going to need it. So that's what that is doing there. Okay, the second part of moving arguments from one place to another is passing entities and attributes back to callbacks. So we've got three things that will do that, and that's state callbacks. They react to a change in state, such as listen state, and then whatever it was that triggered that action, we can pass that information back into our function. And the same with scheduler callbacks. If we schedule a specific time or interval, like run in or run at or run daily, we can also pass back keyword arguments that relate to our run in or our run daily. And then once again, we've got event callbacks, which we're not actually going to be using in our app today. We're going to be using the other two. If we have a look here at an example of that, we've got a listen state, and basically this just listens to binary sensor.drive. And if it senses something, it'll run this function, this callback function here, which you can name that whatever you like. And what it's going to do is, in addition to the standard things that it passes back, like entity, which is that here, and the attributes that may be associated with the entity, and what's the old state and the new state, we can also do keyword arguments. And so this is one that's custom. You can call that any name you like, and you can see how it's brought into the function. You use the statement keyword arguments, and it's a dictionary, so we just specify that we want args1, which is what we've called it here. So that's just a quick example of how we can bring variables from here into here. Now, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to take things from here to here? Well, if we look at our app just here, what we've done is we've got a for loop, and what this for loop does is it cycles through all the stations. So I've got 2 in my example, but we could have 6 or 7 or 8 stations, and it cycles through them. And when it hears that one of the stations wants to manually start, if you press manual start on your dashboard or in Home Assistant, then basically it detects that, and then what it does is it goes, okay, so that station that's triggered the manual start, what is the station valve that we want to turn on, and how long do we want to run it for? So we've made those custom variables that we want to pass to our function. We've called it valve and runtime. We grab those variables out of the dictionary, which is inside of the stations, and we're now going to pass those variables down to a manual start function, which is just here. So in addition to getting the entity that triggered it, we got the keyword arguments, and now we can use those keyword arguments to do things. So for instance, we can use the runtime, and this is a good example of keeping in mind when you pass arguments through into your program. Just bear in mind that the runtime is actually an entity in Home Assistant, and it's not actually a number or a time. So what you have to do is use a built-in function of Appdaemon, which is called getState, and it actually gets the state of the entity in Home Assistant, and that brings in a number, and this little part here is basically just turning it into an integer. Then you'll be able to put that number into a timer, a run-in function down here. So basically we work out the runtime, and we put the runtime in here, which will be runtime in seconds, and then we multiply it by 60 and make it minutes. That's what that is doing in regards to importing arguments. If we come back up here a little bit, we'll see what else this program is doing. Basically, it's importing all our arguments. It's resetting things. So if the program gets restarted, the valves don't stay on. It resets all the valves, puts the flags to off, cancels timers so the timers are clear. Just here, log these 2 things. So if I delete this, we'll see in our logs that what will happen. So we'll have a look at that. So we're going to import watering days, and we're going to log them. So basically, the first one is we imported the list, which is how it was stored in our app setup, and then we've converted it into a string. So I've logged both things, the one we're importing and the one that we've converted it to. So that's the string that we're going to use in our callback function, and that's how we imported it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is using handles. So I sort of mentioned here that we're setting up stuff and we're cancelling timers, cancelling handles. So what we've got here is a handle which is self inline, and it's for a sequence. And to cancel it, get rid of it, clear it, we can just set it to none, like so. And we've also got a program timer here. So that's the handle of the timer, and this is the timer here. So the first thing we do is we set it to none to make sure there's nothing left in there, and then we can put a handle here, and we can start our timer. So we start our timer here. Now what will happen is we might be running a manual program, and we want to stop it early. So to stop it early, it means we have to stop the timer. So if we come down here to our manual program, we'll see that part of our manual start function includes an off. So if we've started a manual program and we want to stop it before the program comes to an end, it means we need to cancel the timer. And because we've got the handle here called self.programTimer, which we've given it that name, it's our choice what we want to name it. When we want to cancel it, all we have to do is we use self cancel timer, and we put the handle of the program timer in there, and that'll cancel the timer. And then before you start a new timer, you also want to make sure that you set it to none, just so that the timer is empty. If the timer expires and finishes, it doesn't matter, the timer won't be there, it'll be cancelled. But if we cancel it early, we want to make sure you set the timer handle to none before you reuse it again. So that is basically how handles work, and they work with other things too, like callbacks. You can cancel a callback, and you can cancel a sequence, which is what we've done up here, but we're going to get to sequences later. So that's how you make use of handles. Now you don't actually have to use a handle. You can have a timer without a handle. Sometimes you don't need to use one, there's no need to, and that's fine. But if you want to cancel something, you need to have a handle. We'll have a look at just that quickly, just to clarify it. So basically we have a run daily timer. So we want to run something at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we want it to run program. So we set that run timer there. Now, if we want to change it, we can't cancel it. So what we do is we set a handle called self my timer, and we set it to none, and we put the handle just here, and we can put our timer that follows the handle. And now we've got a handle on it, what we can do is we can cancel it, like so. We can clear the timer, and we can make a new time at 9 o'clock. But if we don't have the handle, we can't cancel it. Okay, let's move on to formatting logs. So there's lots of ways we can do that. We can use any sort of string manipulation that's part of Python. So we've got C strings here. We can just write just like that, or we can just pass a variable straight in, which is pretty straightforward. If we want to have text or a string and a variable in there, we can use C strings like this just here. And we can also use .format function like that. So we can use .format, and whatever variables follow in the brackets will get passed into these here. But I'll skip over those fast, because the best way I think is to use F strings, which are the easiest way to do the logging. So basically an F string, if you don't know, you can look it up on any Python website. You put an F before the string just here, and then all you have to do is put the brackets, and the variables go inside of there like that. And I believe you can actually do basic functions and calculations inside of there as well. But that's the easiest way to format logs. So that's basically a good example. But there's one thing just to look out for when you use these F strings, and that is when you are using dictionaries, and you have a dictionary here inside the brackets. If you use the single quotations or the double quotations everywhere, that actually won't work. So what you have to do is just use the double quotations on the outside and the single quotations on the inside on the dictionary value, and then it will work okay. So that's just something to look out for. Okay, so that's how you format the logs. Let's go back, and we're going to have a look at constraints now. So we've got an example of a constraint by the watering days. Now this is a really good example of why this is designed for automation and Home Assistant. It has constraints that make it really easy to do stuff. I actually started doing this a roundabout way, a more complicated way, and I didn't really appreciate how good constraints were, but now I'm using constraints. It makes it so much easier to set up automations. So what we're actually doing is you can set constraints at the app level, so the whole app gets affected by them, or you can actually set them at the callback level. So we're setting a constraint on the timer program. So we only want our automatic timer to run on certain days, because here in WA we have restrictions, and according to our house number we can only run it on 2 days a week. So I would set my days to the days that I'm allowed to run it on, and that way I'd set them in here. So I would change that so it's just 2 days in here, and it would only run that callback on those 2 days. Now if it were to affect the entire function or the entire app, then I wouldn't be able to run the manual once off valve. So it's good that we can apply it just to the callback function on the automatic timer. So we've imported it as a list, we've converted the list to a string, and then we've put it here in our program timer, and you can see it there as constraint days, and we've imported our days that we want to put there. Now this is a daily timer, so basically it will try to run every day according to the time of the day we've set, and it will only run on the days that it's allowed to run on. If we come and have a look at constraints, it's got an example of it just here. So if we've got a daily timer, if we have Wednesday, Thursday, it will only run on those days. And we've got other types of constraints too. We have constraint start time and constraint stop time. And in between these times is the only time that the function will work or the app will work. And then we have the constraint input boolean, constraint input select, presence, and time. You can also make your own custom constraints as well. And please notice that constraint day is actually constrained day. For some reason, all of these have constraint in them, but for day, it only has constrained day. That actually caught me out. It took me ages to notice. So that's just something to look out for. So that's basically how you can use constraints. You can use them inline, or you can actually put the constraints in your apps.yaml file for the entire application. Okay, so the last thing we're going to have a look at is sequences. But before we get to sequences, we'll continue down through our program. And so we've got our manual start, which we've had a look at. We've got our manual stop, that if it detects that you've stopped it, or if the timer times out, it will stop the station and turn everything off. It's pretty straightforward. We also need to have a function for changing the start time. Because the start time is an entity in Home Assistant, we need to set up a listener, which we've done up the top just here, so that if you change your start time in the Home Assistant interface, it detects that you've changed it, and then what it does is it reloads the start time into the correct variable and restarts the timer. So we have to cancel the timer. We set the program timer to none, and then we restart the program timer with the new start time. So that's another good example of why we need to use a handle on our timers, so we can do that. And so that's just a little function just to cancel the timer and restart the timer if you change the start time. Okay, so now the next part is the program, and it's our last function. That makes use of sequences. So I actually at first was doing this. You can't use the sleep function unless you're doing an async program, which we're not. Without sleep, it was a little bit difficult. I set up quite a convoluted way of doing it the first time, but then I figured out that it's actually much easier to use an inline sequence, because you can have sequences that are inline and you can have ones that are predetermined in advance. So I'll just show you just this section here. So you can actually put sequences predetermined into your apps.yaml, and they are formatted something like this. And you can have steps, so you can have turn something on, set the brightness, sleep for 30 seconds, turn something off, and there's different ways of formatting it, but it's all just YAML. And you can also loop things indefinitely, so you can have a sequence that loops indefinitely without stopping. So once you've set up this in your apps.yaml, you can then run it in your app by using a handle, and then self-run sequence, sequence.mySequence. The other way which we're using today is the inline sequence. So you can actually create it inline like so. So you can put all your entities like this. Now the documentation actually showed it with a dot, and there's another section that shows it with a line. The dot didn't work for me, but the line does. So you have a forward slash, I shouldn't say a line, forward slash between the domain and the instruction, turn on, light, turn on. Okay, let's jump back over into our program. And so basically it makes use of inline functions, and it does so by, first what it does is it starts a list. It's in the list to start off with, it puts on turn on the main valve, which every program will need. So that's the list with turn on the main valve. It then loops through all the stations and all the stations that are active to run on the program automatically. So if you've turned one off, it won't run it. But if all the ones that are active, it says here if it's active, then what it does is it gets the runtime and it gets the valve entity, and then it attaches the valve entity to turn on. It puts sleep for the runtime, and then valve entity turn off. And then it extends the list, and so that it's one long continuous list. So you don't append it, you extend it. And then once you've got all your stations added, then you can append to the end of the list main valve turn off. So once the sequence is created, all you have to do is run the inline sequence. So we've got that all set up now. I've got it set to 60 minutes. I'll just jump it back down to 2 so that we don't have to wait too long, and we'll give it a quick run in our browser on Home Assistant to see how it works. So that's pretty much the whole program. 2 values here so that they don't run for ages because we don't want to wait for forever. And we'll jump across here into Home Assistant. So that's what I've got set up, and we can have as many stations as we want. And we'll just set our run times to just a short amount of time, 2 seconds. So first of all, we've got that's whether it's active or not. So if we turn that off, it won't be started on the auto cycle. If we want to run it manually, we can click here, and you'll see that it turns on. The valve is on, and we can also see that the main valve is on. But it turned off really quickly because we only got it set to like 4 seconds. We can turn that on, and we can turn it off. And we can have a look in the logs. We can see that we've started and stopped it. We can see here that if we change our time to the current time, which is 2:51, and we'll give it a little bit of extra run time. So they're going to run for 12 seconds. So we'll activate both of them. So that's activated just there. Our main valve has come on, and our first station has come on. And if we jump over, and then it's turned off, and the next one's started. So that's just 12 seconds that it's come on for. And that'll run for 12 seconds, and then it'll turn off. So that's off. So it just ran through a little short program. Now what we'll do is we'll turn one of these off, and we'll redo our program, and it should only run the one station. And if we have a look in our logs, we can see that it's created this sequence here, and it's run the sequence, and then it said run the sequence, and then we can see we restarted a new timer. Okay, so that's just started, and it's only started the one that we had active. So our program is all working. It's fully complete. There is, of course, many things that we can add to this. I realize just the start for me, I'm just going to probably add a little bit every now and then when I feel like it. Like for instance, the next thing I would probably add is like the program won't run if we've had rain. I'd like to add that, and of course we might want to cancel the program once it's running. So there's heaps of things you could add to it, but you can see how easy it is using Appdaemon. And of course, once you've written all this, to add another station is really easy. And if you wanted to implement it, you don't have to do any coding. You just have to set up our apps.yaml file just here. So yeah, I hope you've got some value out of it. If you, of course, there's more information down in the description if you want to see the blog that I've written about it, or look at the files that you can grab and use in your Home Assistant. I'd be interested to see if you've got any feedback, what ideas you would want to add to an app like this, or perhaps what you're working on. Just let us know in the comments. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and if you like the video, give us a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe for more videos about home automation and electrical installations. Thanks for watching. See you later.